Civilizations rise not only from strength, but from the stories they reward. In this debate, we ask a difficult question. Does modern society cultivate resilience or incentivize victimhood? So 2 minutes. Let's start with Josh. You'll be steel manning elevator. That means you're going to pretend like you're better and smarter, and you support her position. Whenever you are ready, let me know and I'll hit start.
Okay. One position is that, so the position is that overall society does not promote victimhood. And the reason for that is because, first of all the negative pressures on society promote strength. All the difficulties that are in society make a person have to have fortitude and resilience. And additionally, if you look at the grand scope of history, whatever that includes with modern society, but any slice of time, there's always progress happening. And so you can say just overall, uh, if victimhood is a sort of atrophied, paralyzed state, then we're not in that state. So we must be progressing somehow. Um, and you just see a lot of people talking about, you know, people being stronger and people taking responsibility, and so these are sort of 3 points for why society doesn't promote victimhood, and that's probably all the time I need for that.
All right. Now, the question to elevator, do you feel like that was a fair steel man of your position?
Yeah, I think that covers a lot of what I'm going to be talking about. Um, I would say I'm more agnostic, in the sense that I don't feel particularly strongly to the contrary of the statement. Um, but otherwise, I think that was a fair coverage of different points I'm going to be talking about.
All right. Now let's go to you, steel manning Josh's position. Just let me know when you're ready.
All right. So if I were to steelman the position that modern society does promote victimhood over resilience, I would lead in by saying that there's obvious financial and social incentives for portraying yourself like a victim, right? And these financial and social incentives have changed over time. So there's a strong case to be made that modern society has more of these incentives. We can look at disability, for example. So previously, it wasn't really something to be celebrated, and now it is. We have disability pride, even. And we have different systems designed to give welfare to disabled people that are not available to non disabled people. Same thing with sexual violence, where, to simplify, history has historically seen sexual violence as something that's both a property crime and a moral offense. And nowadays, we're really honing in on framing sexual violence as a moral offense primarily. So we're concerned about the well being of victims of sexual violence, even psychologically. So, regardless of the secondary effects to status or bloodline politics, we care about victims in a different light. So, with all these pro victim shifts, as Nietzsche might put it, from master morality to slave morality over time, we're seeing a different incentive structure emerge. So, society as a whole seems to be advantaging people for portraying themselves as victims or for being victims, while seemingly leaving resilient people to the wayside, not providing them with the same advantages. I think that's broadly what I'd expect. Yeah.
Josh, was that a fair steel man of your position?
The idea that there's high incentive to victimize people is certainly my position. Uh, Yeah.
Great. All right, let's move into our opening statements. Josh, you're up first. You have 5 minutes. I'll raise my hand at a minute, or would you like 30 seconds?
Yeah, 30 seconds is good.
Sounds good. Just let me know when to hit start.
Good to go. So the position I'm taking to make this argument interesting for me, because I don't as much find the analysis of the common zeitgeist of the way people talk about modern times, or you know it's a very common topic. So I maybe shifted the emphasis off modern society and put it more on just society in general. My argument is maybe a non-standard one, but it's a stronger argument to support. So it's an evolutionary argument, or it's maybe analogous to an evolutionary argument. The idea is that what we've seen for the entirety of history, human history, all the way to the first origins of life, was a imposition from nature, or you could say the culture of organisms, analogous to the culture that we're currently in, uh, a pressure to victimize any organism. And so, the argument that the difficulties in society make people stronger, I reject that, because if you think about the relationship between a deer and a cougar or something, the the deer, you know is pressured by the cougar, and it doesn't it's you could say it's resilient because it sort of survives in the local time, but the fact that it's sort of constantly at battle with the trying to stay alive doesn't give it opportunity to explore, to evolutionarily progress. And so what we've seen in evolution is that every single animal has stayed in the food chain, sort of stayed a victim of some system. And um, only rarely, in the case of Homo sapiens, did we ever sort of break out of the food chain. And so that's the exact same pattern that we see in society now. Uh, all the systems about society are set up to lock a person in place, because that's what they're incentivized to do. It's the predaceous element of society, set up to yes, it pressures them, and you could say that the pressure maybe motivates them to do things. No, the pressure exists to lock the person down. Um, and so society, so individuals in society. So you see great individuals who help people and are strengthening people, but whenever somebody has like true information which is good, that information is distributed, and then society takes its function. So my argument is that the sort of, you know, tremendous amount of positive stuff we've seen is a result of really powerful and courageous people standing up and helping society. But society as a whole, it progresses, but the reason it progresses is more of this sort of like search function. It's almost like society does every single bad thing it possibly can until it's no longer feasible. Like it used to be, like people would have to sort of like go to work all the time, and there was no safety, and there was none of this. And why is that? Because it's like society will do the worst thing until, it's so entirely unaccepted by every single individual that, we move on from it. But it's important to understand this sort of negative function society has, because if you think society is sort of like going to be your friend and it's going to like, you know help uh, in some way facilitate you not being a victim, that's not true. Society wants to lock you in a job, wants to lock you in a position, lock you in an environment where you're lower down in the food chain, essentially. So that's my argument.
All right. Great stuff. Let's go to elevator. for your opening statement. You have 5 minutes. Just let me know when to hit start.
Alrighty then. So to start off, I want to get some definitions out of the way for how I would define victimhood and resilience and encouragement. So victimhood, I would define as the quality of having been hurt in some way, like you said. And particularly, it's useful when describing when people are trying to garner sympathy, right? And they're using self-pity to get people to feel sorry for them. So when I say victim mentality, which I'm sure I'll be saying in the conversation, I'll be referring to specific instances where people act like victims when the harm to them is either not real or not significant by the standard of a reasonable person. Resilience, on the other hand, I would define as the ability to overcome something difficult that has happened. So the statement, essentially, the subject of this debate is, does modern society make it likely for people to be frail, for them to dwell in self-pity, rather than encouraging them to overcome these challenges? So you've made the argument that difficulties in society make people stronger. Sorry, the opposite, that difficulties in society are designed to make people weaker, to like break them down. And it's only over time that we see strong people emerging and surviving. I would say I agree to an extent. But I think of all periods of time in history, modern society seems most forgiving, and the least victimizing. Of course, this depends on the metric you're looking at, right? I mean, prosecution stats are still not looking good. Conviction stats are still not looking good in a lot of countries. Depression, not great. But globally, I believe that resource availability tends to underpin resilience. So people's capacity to overcome difficulty is improved by resource availability. And over time, we've had more resource availability, which translates to people being more able to overcome their difficult circumstances. So to give some examples, I mean, historically, there's been instances of high mobility tribes, let's say. Let's look at like horse cultures in the steppes, right? So Mongolia through to Ukraine. There has been recorded instances of infanticide, abandoning members, families, and friends on the basis that they were weak and therefore not capable of keeping up with their mobile lifestyle. But there's also instances where people are willing to take on the sacrifice of taking care of these vulnerable people. And indeed, over time, when you look at different civilizations, the more resources they have, the more excess resources they have, the more willing they are to take care of their fellow man, even if they're vulnerable, even if they struggle to contribute to society. So you've got the Seljuk Turks, you've got welfare systems in modern England, right? The NHS. Throughout history, it seems like an excess of food, of fuel, of people, of labor translates to better living conditions. Now, as for the preemptive argument that might come up later on about victim mentality and how it's being encouraged in modern day society, my argument to that would be, well, I think that, much like you, there's always been an evolutionary incentive to support people who are vulnerable. Throughout history, whether you're looking at Greece or Rome or whatever, there's always been instances of people leveraging victim mentality to get what they want, right? And modern society is certainly not unique in this respect. Okay, I'm interested in jumping into the Q&A portion and doing a back and forth. I think that covers it.
Now let's go into the rebuttals. Josh, you have 3 minutes. Let me know when to start.
Okay, good to start. Um, So definitionally, we're starting from sort of different definitions. I think you were responding to my definition of victimhood because you were responding to people being locked in positions and stuff like this. But the definition I think that you maybe had going into it was this definition of playing the victim, versus I'm wanting more the definition of any mode of operation where the person has a Weltanschauung that is restrictive because they have a belief that they're in some way permanently unable to insurmount some problem. So I would say a victim mentality is, if you're in a job workplace and you just think like your boss is like, you know, you can't do anything to stand up against him because he's the totalitarian rule. I view this as victimhood. Now, it's fair that when somebody says victimhood in modern society, what they are generally talking about is people playing the victim. But I mean, I think it's a deeper thing to be the victim, in a paralyzing way. It's a more maybe interesting level of analysis. And so the position I'm taking is not that overall modern society is, yeah, more promoting of that necessarily. My position is that the perspective that you should view society as, its function is that its attempt is to atrophy your position in society. So, you think about in evolution, if you were a species in evolution and you say, am I going to succeed because of the process of evolution? Uh, Statistically speaking, it's very, very unlikely that you are going to be one of the successful members of evolution. Most of the species never evolved past walking around on four legs. And so, even though evolutionarily we progress, even though societally we progress, it's if you're locally, you should view the function of what it's doing as trying to lock you in a victim state. Because yes, people will sneak through, but statistically, you're not going to be one.
All right. Let's go to elevator with your rebuttal. You have 3 minutes. Let me know when to hit start.
So it seems like the core tension is about what society is trying to do and whether or not it's sufficiently hostile to the people living inside it that we can say, well, it's promoting victimhood. For me, the point of view that society has, this framing that society has a hostile intention is interesting because it feels partly true in the sense that, like you said, evolutionarily speaking, not everyone can survive. Resources are limited. There are zero-sum games everywhere. But at the same time, the counter could be made, the counter argument could be made that society benefits people within it, right? Unlike animals living in the plains and trying to make life work for themselves, by themselves, society functions to help the average Joe survive, whether that's through welfare systems or just facilitating social contracts, having guidelines. So, in many ways, I'd say society is actually quite altruistic. It protects the vulnerable just as much as the strong. I mean, the rule of law, the whole point of the rule of law is keeping everyone accountable to a certain set of guidelines that everyone can benefit from, at least in theory. And when we look at certain metrics, it certainly seems like society has performed its function of being altruistic. It's successfully altruistic. I mean, if we look, for example, at rates of mental illness and recovery, advances in medicine and tech, which were brought about by society, by these social contracts facilitating collaboration between different scientists and doctors and what have you. Advances in tech and law and social awareness have made it so that many people with depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, what have you, can now recover. And at least in the context of the NHS in England, it's pretty successful at doing this. So I think the figure was, as of 2025, 2024, 2025, NHS England reported that people completing their course of talking therapies were undergoing a significant amount of recovery within, over the course of talking therapies, 67% of them. So that is a large proportion, the majority, that are benefiting in some way, where previously this wouldn't have been possible, right? Not only were talking therapies not available 500, 600 years ago, but even if they were available, they weren't necessarily accessible to everyone. It seems to me that collaboration is society, and collaboration helps people. So framing it as this hostile entity seems contradictory to its purpose.
Now we'll step into the 10-minute open discussion. Just let me know we are ready, and I'll hit start.
I'm good.
Somebody kick it off.
Okay, well, I'll jump in because the last statement was a rebuttal to what I said. So, from the position of a person, the useful perspective or the pragmatic perspective is the one I'm going to focus on here, because I'm going to differentiate between sort of the crystallized progress of society and then the current dynamic function of society. So, society has built up a tremendous amount of beneficial systems for the individual that remove their victimhood. Society has so far removed people out of even the evolutionary food chain largely. What I'm focusing on isn't the progress society has made, but the dynamic relationship every individual has with it in the moment, which is a distinctly different relationship. If I use an analogy, if somebody used to go to your house and like you had something stuck on the roof and they just start throwing stones at your house, and you say, well, it's useful because they might hit the thing off the roof, but they're in the meantime smashing all the windows. You would say, you know overall, that's a damaging function. And so it's you can you can have both. Essentially, you can have the society does overall progress while sort of trying to lock its individual members in a victim place.
Okay. So I guess my question to you would be, what would a non-hostile society look like? Is this something that is just baked into the very fabric of the universe, that the universe is uncaring and is constantly, well, inevitably, it's going to tear people, animals down? Or is there a situation you can envision where society or the universe or the environment actually doesn't promote victimhood? Like, what would that look like?
Yeah. So what it would look like is more people than not, or at least the relevant percentage of people, would have pure, egoless, Scott hates that word, but intentions. And that's not what we have right now. I think the people, especially anonymized, you see in sort of online chats, are really hyper psychopathic. And so the very clear reality where society wouldn't victimize people would be a place where the individuals are all very loving, which is what I would say is not the case right now.
That is interesting.
Now, I will say though, like I am sort of steering the argument into like my perspective of this, which is easier to defend, but you also have your position, which is the um maybe the different definition of victimhood, which is victimhood as sort of like playing the victim card, and society is sort of modern society specifically, like how it relates to now versus my perspective is more society in general.
Yeah, and I'm perfectly happy delving into this line of thinking about victimhood, the first half of that definition of like, are people being hurt? Like, is the net effect of society negative for the average person? Um, so I'll put aside the whole victim mentality thing. I think this is actually quite interesting, this line of thinking. So the way I see it, there is no such thing as an egoless intention, right? And I, in a previous episode of the Nobody podcast, if it were, um, mentioned I don't even believe in free will. I don't actually believe that humans are capable of really like willing their actions in the same way that many people think. I think everything is ego all the way down because everything is environment and biology all the way down. Or rather, I don't even believe in the distinction between egoless and egoful behavior. So it's interesting to see because it seems like you're saying, well, a situation where society would be egoless would be if people were in net being advantaged in in some meaningful way. But you don't seem to believe that current society is providing people with these advantages. Is that right?
It's just not. It's just the vast majority of people are not interested in providing other people freedom. Um, and well, I mean, man, I would love to dive into a discussion about free will. Um, we don't necessarily need to go there though to still get something about egolessness. So imagine a person who discovers that, just a very basic level of reasoning, they just discover that in order for them to connect best with people, they should be authentic. In order to be authentic, they have to sort of not lie. And in order to not lie, they should not have bad intentions for other people, because if they're not lying and they're authentic and they have bad intentions, they would express those and people would like them less. And so this person discovers that in society, I should actually be entirely loving, because if I'm not, people will not like me as much. And so this individual goes, oh, I want to be fitted best in society, so I'm going to become entirely loving. Now, that's even from your framework derived from the environment and whatever selfish position they have, sort of selfishly becoming uh, purely selflessly loving. And so maybe I would just respond and say, I think people are not smart enough to be selfless, but it's very possible.
Um, well, on that topic, I suppose, do you think that society has gotten more selfless over time? Like, let's take modern society compared to previous iterations. Is it the case that, okay, fair enough, you might believe that on the net effect is that people are still acting selfishly on average and that life is still pretty miserable for a lot of people. But is it getting better over time in your view? Or is
Yeah.
it just standard? So it is getting better over time.
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
Okay.
I would say.
Um, okay. I guess fundamentally then, the disagreement that I'd identify is that the statement for me is the statement that modern society encourages victimhood over resilience um, is technically unfalsifiable, but it's equally the opposite is equally true, right? The claim could be made that modern society actually promotes victimhood, sorry, promotes resilience over victimhood compared to previous versions of society. So yeah, there's a tension there. I'm interested to actually explore the. I mean, I don't know if we'll have the time if the section is wrapping up, but I'm interested to explore the egoless component. of your argument of people aren't smart enough to be egoless? Because that I didn't fully understand. Like, can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so the argument would be that um the I'll lay it out as quickly as possible, but the best state of being where you can have most conscious moments. I guess we don't necessarily agree on free will, but to have as many moments which are like uh, you would have to be um, not lying. Why? Because lying is specifically copying a behavior and playing it back. So every time a person is lying, they are not computing information. They're not consciously engaging with it. They're just simply replaying a pattern. And so basically the argument is that there's a sophisticated model behind this, but that the smartest mode of being is to be authentic, because then you can actually experience more individual moments of life. So life is more full. You're more alive. Um, and additionally, if you're going to be authentic, then you better be loving, because if you're not, people are gonna. Authentic means you don't lie. You're you're not putting on a face. And if you're authentic and you aren't loving in some way, then you're just less preferred. And then there's also maybe an argument that sounds more like a hippie argument, but that sort of like the love mode of being is a better one, because if you could define yourself as the place where your small, your physical material presence in the world, but that's not necessarily a clear definition. So additionally, you could say that loving other people and society is beneficial to you, because you're feeding into the thing which also helps you. So there's this, it's just a farther way of, like, if you're basically, just think of a clear example. If you're one person in a tribe and there's 10 other people, and you're always hurting the other people, your tribe's going to do worse. So better help them so you can do better.
Okay, so it sounds like you're saying from a non-normative perspective, like collaboration is usually more advantageous for survival than acting as a lone wolf who's like abusing rules. I think I'd agree with that. I think it's case by case. I mean, obviously, there's some instances where people are way better off because they're acting selfishly, right? But on the society scale, like if you're talking about larger scale populations, collaborative societies tend to perform better. So I agree there. Where I think I still disagree is there's this there's like an element in what you're saying, which is that the smartest move is to be authentic and loving, but people aren't doing it because of stupidity. Sorry, Discord is going wild in the background. Um, I would argue that it's not possible, right? I mean, what drives people to be authentic? I guess let's go there. What do you think is the underlying process that drives decision making?
Wow. What's the process that drives decision making? For some reason, I don't know how to like interface with that question.
It's pretty
What's
broad. Basically, I'm
it,
trying to bait you into a free will debate
right? It's
part
is
two.
it is it, is it it's okay. So it's like determinism. It's like the consequences of past behavior. Yeah. I mean, I guess our time is up, but I would just say that um yeah, free will, just because the only way we can look at the world is logical, and logic necessarily has there's only um causal actions and random actions. Therefore, you think everything is either causal or random. I would just put forward that um, not maybe there's things which are non-logical, and those would be free will things. That it's a bigger argument, but yeah.
Cool. Yeah. I think y'all would have a good discussion whenever it comes to that topic. All right, let's go to the Q&A part. I have one for each of you, and then I have a third one that'll go to both of you. So the first one will go to Josh. This is, what trade-offs come from encouraging victimhood?
The trade-off that comes from encouraging victimhood is that you lock an individual in a lower state, and then you get to have better mate selection, better resources.
All right. So elevator, your question is, what trade-offs come from encouraging resilience?
Well, it depends on your definition of resilience. But I suppose if we go with the definition of um like encouraging people to overcome difficulty, some thoughts that come to mind is that resilience is preferable in the grand majority of situations to dwelling in self-pity. That said, it's not always possible. So the trade-off is sometimes it's not possible to overcome difficulty that you've been subjected to, right? And sometimes, of course, with the financial and social incentives of not being resilient, there's the odd case here and there where you might be better off if you choose to not overcome your difficulties and instead stay in this state of self-pity or victimhood, as I defined it broadly earlier.
That I almost want to follow up on both of those on each of y'all because that was so short. That's pretty quick.
Yeah, go
But
for it if you want.
I would have to remember what you said, Josh.
Oh, but you could follow up on just hers if you want.
All right, so one more time. You're saying that sometimes it pays off to be a victim and sometimes it pays off to be resilient?
Yeah. In most cases, it's preferable to be resilient, but there's the odd case where, you know, maybe if you actually tally up the pros and cons of what it would take to overcome the difficulty, it's better to stay in self pity, maybe even reap the benefits of other people's charity.
Okay. Well, I want to ask the difficult question. Do you think that's good? Good.
I think it is the way it is. It is what it is, basically. I don't see it as particularly good or bad. I just see it as a tally, right? Like there are some situations in which you're trying to optimize for like X metric, and X metric is going to be bigger if you're a victim or if you're resilient. Um,
Right.
I mean,
And so at scale, is it good or bad? So I understand, like, as an individual, it can be whatever, but this is why it's a hard question, because I'm asking your moral judgment now, and that requires some vulnerability. And so do you feel like being vulnerable and answering, do you think it's good that we have this scalable opportunity to capitalize on being a victim?
the net effect is yes, at least in my experience, the trade offs are worthwhile. Where I hear a lot of argumentation. This is kind of where I was anticipating with the conversation to go, right, with the victim mentality debate. But I mean, controversially, I think that the downsides of encouraging people to partake in victim mentality are a little over exaggerated. At least it, it depends, but broadly speaking, I think people don't abuse the system. This is a minority of cases where people are dwelling in self pity and being miserable. I think most people want to be happy, and it would be preferable for most of the population to be resilient if they could. You have the occasional, person, a bad egg who wants to abuse the charity of others, but yeah. The reason I say it depends, though, and this is maybe a little bit of a cop out, coming out of the vulnerability state. Well, time is a factor to keep in mind. At a single point in time, the trade-offs might be totally acceptable. But then over time, things might get bad. Let's say, for example, you have a situation where you're offering people a boatload of money and they can pick out from that pool of money whenever they want. And you trust people to not abuse the system. Over enough generations, over enough time, if you have that kind of system, you're going to run into some bad eggs, more and more bad eggs over time, until eventually the system is no longer sustainable. So, yeah, if you're taking time into consideration, we could be here forever. As it is currently, my knee jerk is that victim mentality isn't like a huge issue. At the very least, it's not an issue that's like concerning to me at the moment. There's fringe instances of people abusing the charity of others, of abusing self-pity, but throughout history we've always had that, and I haven't seen enough compelling evidence to suggest that there's been a spike. If anything, in terms of legal protections, victims are less favored in many ways. Yeah.
Interesting. There's a lot more I could dig in on that. But I kind of want to dig in on Josh now. Could you please remind me what you said for your trade-offs or from encouraging
You said that
victimhood?
yeah, there's a motivation. I didn't, maybe I thought later maybe I was answering wrong, thinking about the question wrong, but there's a motivation to put people in a victim mentality, for society to put people in a victim mentality, because when people are in a victim mentality, they're less mobile and more manipulatable, and therefore you can advantage over them by um they're just locked in they're more like cattle. That's the gross metaphor, but like,
Yeah, I got you. And you're saying like some systems that have been developed in society are actively encouraging victimhood.
yeah, I'm saying society generally does.
Right. You're not saying that individuals do. You're saying when a bunch of people get together, this emerges?
It's the individual as a part of the system that leads to the emergent phenomena. I mean, um, yeah.
Right. I guess I'm trying to clarify. You don't think that there's just one or 10, a very small amount of people that are doing the encouraging. You're saying that this is just a naturally occurring system based on just how humans exist. There's not like an authority that is encouraging victimhood.
Yeah, I'm saying it's us moving out of, our evolutionary roots and still being entirely caught up in this way of the predaceous function of society. Yeah.
I got you. Like we respond to the signals that we've always responded to.
Yeah, like it's been, yeah.
Okay. Last question for both of y'all. We'll start with Josh. Can both resilience and victimhood increase at the same time?
Yeah, resilience is an interesting word because, yeah, resilience, you can think of it as sort of survival. And yeah, I mean, that was my example of people, in order to survive, right? There's some predaceous element. Society is like, you have to do this. You have to, um, you know, have a certain lifestyle or something. And so the person conforms to that and they are resilient in that domain. My level of analysis is zooming out to the larger domain and saying, okay, they're resilient. The attempt to make them a victim to put them in a victim mentality, made them resilient to that force, but that's a local resilience. And overall, they have stuck.
So I understood you right. You said no, they don't increase at the same time. They're just constantly at the same level battling each other.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it just depends on which level of analysis. That's what I was saying. There's two ways you can look at the word resilient. Local resilience. So, like, again, like, a bear attacks a deer, the deer survives. It's resilient. Evolutionarily, the reason it survived is because it has hooves and it never developed fingers because it was so good at surviving on rocks and stuff. And then that's an analogous to society.
Can we
You know,
use a human example?
yeah. So
And more like a realistic psychological
yeah,
understanding of resilience rather than I have hooves, therefore I am resilient.
yeah. um, so maybe a person in society thinks they have to have a certain level of class, certain high class of clothing and eating out and transportation. And so they work really hard to maintain this system, right? And so the predaceous element is society judging them. You need to be at our level in order to fit in with us. And then the person's resilient to that dimension. They stand up to it. They work longer hours so they can be at that level of class. And then overall, they're engaging potentially. In some cases, I'm not saying all fashion is bad and all that. I'm just saying that in some cases, this kind of arbitrary fitting up to society leads to the person not actually excelling in any way. They don't actually become smarter. They don't actually do anything productive because they're locked in the cycle of working all the time to then have the things that society says they need.
Gotcha. All right, elevator. It's your turn. Can both resilience and victimhood increase at the same time?
So we're touching on different definitions. I'm gonna use Josh's definition. So where resilience is about survival, victimhood is about being kept down, right? Like being kept pliable and vulnerable and non-agentic. I guess I would agree with Josh in the sense that I think there's a push and pull between victimhood and resilience. So short answer. Actually, I guess this is not what Josh said. I do think victimhood and resilience can coincide. If victimhood is the quality of being kept pliable and resilience is the quality of surviving, well, yeah, on both local and population levels, they can coexist. Um, Another thing I would add is that I believe for humans, the kind of currency that drives behavior is happiness and the absence of happiness, reward and punishment. And I think that people who can maximize their happiness while using the least amount of resources will, on average, be better off. They'll be better at reproducing, they'll be better at living, what have you. So on the systemic scale, I actually think that maybe like there's a push and pull between people who want to keep other people as victims, as pliable, but then also people trying to be resilient in the face of these influences. So to take the analogy of like someone who's uh, adopting this kind of consumerist lifestyle that doesn't actually fulfill them, well, the people who can break through are going to survive better. The people who can't are going to end up spending all their money and then not being able to provide for their future generations as well, at least in theory. So they can coexist, and Yeah, there's a push and pull dynamic between the two, I'd say.
Okay. That makes me have so many more questions, y'all. I just want to start with one, and maybe we can be done with this Q&A section. So thank you for hanging out. I would like, starting with elevator, I would like if you could define victimhood and resilience, how you think people are thinking it, rather than, y'all's definition you've been using.
Okay, great. So I'd return to the definition that I kind of um, mentioned at the top of my opening arguments of like how I would use these terms. I think that's like cross-checked with the Cambridge Dictionary. Basically, victimhood is the quality of being hurt in some way, um, whether that's emotionally, physically, what have you. And it's particularly used in contexts where you're trying to, or at least nowadays, is particularly used in contexts where you're trying to say someone is lying about having been hurt or they're exaggerating their hurt. So when you hear colloquially people talking about a victim mentality, they're talking about not someone who's been hurt genuinely. That's less of a concern. They're talking more about how this person is pretending to be a victim to reap the benefits of what it means to be perceived as a victim. I think colloquially, when people think about resilience, they define it as the quality of being able to bounce back after something hard has happened. So let's say the drug addict who manages to go through rehab and come out of it on the other side um, without withdrawal symptoms. The person with depression who's come out of therapy being less prone to mood swings, or the person whose feelings have been hurt in an argument who manages to bounce back and no longer be offended the next time someone insults them. These are all instances where I think the average person thinks about when they think about resilience.
All right. What do you think, Josh?
What I'm going to do, I'm going to continue being just really off the rails
Be
with
authentic.
the,
Be authentic.
level of analysis I bring. But what I'll say is that I'll go meta on this one to try to circumnavigate just instantly losing on the spot, essentially. But I'll say that the idea of the victim mentality that society has being this narrow scope of that person who pretends to be the victim is a part of society being locked in the larger scale victim mentality. And I mean, I don't think this is necessarily a great argument because yes, it's true that colloquially speaking, these are not the definitions um that anybody means when they say argue, victim mentality in modern society. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't seem like a particularly, it's like, people focus on this thing. Society focuses on this thing. It's one of the things society is focusing on right now. It's the victim mentality. Victim mentality is sort of bad. So society is sort of, correcting this, and people are sort of all focused on this. And I just view it as not a particularly interesting focus. I think there's phases of what just sort of appears in the zeitgeist. Everybody is on somebody's case for something, and it's this or that. And for a while it was the victim mentality. Everybody would be like, oh, look at this person, he's such a victim. And yeah, there is like progress in that, but also to some degree it's like, why are it's so much focus on what other people are doing, and there's no integration of it. And so even the focus on the colloquial understanding of victim mentality in modern society, to me, is people being locked into my definition of the victimhood.
Awesome. Thank y'all for indulging all the questions. Let's go to the closing statements. Josh, you're up first. You have 3 minutes. Let me know when to start.
Okay, I'm good to start. Yeah, I mean, frankly, I think I just got smashed in this debate. I think that really, I know when I'm sort of not doing good in the debate, when I start like having to go to like really deep and like side uh area things. I think that the position, um basically just saying that the colloquial definition is this pretending to be a victim, and then I wasn't staying on track. Um, and also, I thought it was quite impressive that Elevator um, responded to my quite blindside strategy of basically changing the definition. But yeah, I would just say I lost the debate. I don't really have anything. I can't really.
Elevator, I am resetting the clock. Whenever you're ready, let me know.
Yeah, can jump in. I wouldn't say that there's like a loser to the debate. I mean, I was definitely like uh not expecting the direction that you were going to take with the definition of victimhood and resilience. I think fundamentally that your argument is pretty strong in the baseline that like on average, people are in this tug of war with nature, with other people, and they're going to show up as losers. I mean, ultimately, I I think the statement modern society encourages victimhood more than resilience. Um, it's equally as true as its counter. So it's not like it's an interesting angle. I don't think that it's particularly meaningful in the sense that I mean, society can be portrayed as a hostile entity. It could also be portrayed as a helpful one. Um, People who collaborate tend to perform better. So that seems to suggest that selfless behavior is is good for survival actually, and that maybe on the universal scale you can take the position that actually collaboration is evolutionarily selected for, that selfless behavior is evolutionarily selected for. I was going to say something else. I don't remember this. But yeah, on the victim mentality side, I mean, my takes with that are very similar to Josh's actually. Of like, I don't particularly feel strongly about whether victim mentality is getting encouraged now. Particularly when you look in the context of history. I mean, is it really the case that people are more self pitying now than they were before? I don't know. We had blasphemy laws before, right? There are instances where you couldn't even say what you wanted to say because you would get locked up simply for offending the sensibilities of someone in power. I mean, it seems like there's always been people in power who have been self-pitying and punishing other people for offending them. So, yeah. I think the free will stuff, it turns out all roads lead back to free will. So very happy to debate that further because I think that also is like the secret, the soil that kind of supports the rest of what we've been talking about today. But yeah, Scott is probably going to be pissed. We're going to be talking about free will again for another hour.
No, I don't think so. I think it's so fascinating that y'all are on the same kind of level where this is just not interesting. But this was done democratically, and the most people found it interesting. So it leaves me wondering, because I'm in the same boat. I think it's incredibly uninteresting. But there's so many good examples. I don't know if I heard y'all mention, right? So like there's victimhood in education where students are constantly trying to be reevaluated. I can think of examples like a mother would uh, see bad grades and immediately, because she's potentially consumed so much whatever information has been fed to her, she's like, I have to get my child evaluated for ADHD immediately right now. And then the kid gets the label, maybe, hopefully not, because there's actual processes done. But maybe it happens by some bad actors, and then this kid now has a label, and then that kid, has that for the rest of their life, and they live with that, and it could be accurate, it could be inaccurate. And there's just so many examples I think people are reaching toward, and that's why I think the claim got voted for the most, is that there are tons of videos, like there's Karens out there you could watch and click on. There's so much content that just shows people whining and complaining and bitching and moaning endlessly. And I'm just interested because y'all never mentioned that once. Like, why is it that y'all don't care to watch that content?
I
Yeah,
love a good. Sorry, go on, Josh.
um, I, I think that's where Elevator probably would have went if I had pushed the position in that direction, but I, wasn't particularly interested in that definition. So I think that was maybe more me.
Oh, I think y'all both had really strong arguments for what you were working with. So I think you're being really hard on yourself, Josh. Jill.
I mean, I just think I think my arguments are good, of course, but I just think that objectively, if you were to rule the debate and go what was the point and what was the argument, I would just say that, mm, yeah,
You did fine. You clarified your definitions and you had a strong position according to your definitions. I think you did the best with what you could, because I would probably be in the same boat where I'm like, I hate this, but I'm going to try to figure it out. I just think it's so fascinating that y'all are both like, eh. Okay, sorry, elevator, go ahead.
No worries. I do have I have a whole laundry list of arguments I could put to the people who probably what the people wanted to see.
right,
But
Yeah. Yeah, I want to hear. I mean,
yeah, you should
if
give
you
it.
don't want to, but I definitely want to hear this appealing to this idea, because this is a popular thing that
yeah,
people seem to care about.
I guess fundamentally my take and the reason why I don't think the debate is particularly interesting, and maybe Josh is in the same boat here, is that in order to make a claim that strong, that like modern society encourages victimhood over resilience, it really comes down to like the modern society bit. I think that's the bit that people are most interested in is, well, back in the day, my great grandparents, they would have just walked off that shotgun injury to the abdomen, but nowadays you got people can't even take like a handgun bullet without doubling over, right? So my argument was broadly going to be, you don't have we don't have strong data, and fundamentally the data that we do have doesn't really give a good picture. You have financial and social incentives throughout all of history to be a victim. So I'm mostly familiar with the UK context, but we have historically in like the Elizabethan and Jacobean periods, there was a term for when able-bodied individuals would refuse to work and instead try to garner pity for for money or to scam people. And these names are ridiculous, by the way. They're British, so it's like halyards and clapperdodgian. I don't even know. We have throughout history instances of people being victimized. Well, sorry, I'll be careful with my words here. People getting punished for offending the sensibilities of others. I touched briefly on like blasphemy laws, which in the UK I found out were only repealed formally in like 2008. You had previously, even as far as like 1942 in the US, you had legislation which meant you could be arrested over words, right? Even with the First Amendment and good old freedom of speech, there is precedent for people being punished on the basis of their words. When I need to bring up the case. Yeah. Chaplinsky versus New Hampshire, 1942. So this guy was arrested for using fighting words against the city marshal, which the court upheld as a lawful decision. I'm no lawyer, but that certainly sounds like free speech getting punished. So, to the people who are concerned about victimhood and about people manipulating victim status for their benefit, I would say look to the economic incentives. And haven't they always been around? Look to history at instances where, I mean, even the word ostracization doesn't come from modern history. It comes from like 500 BC with the ostracismos. So Greeks and Romans, they were just as soy as we are today. Well, okay, maybe not just as soy, but we don't have strong enough evidence to say that they were more or less soy. Yeah.
Well, I know when we used to ostracize people, we would just send them on a boat. We would just have a boat of crazy people is what they would do, and then just say good luck, and then just send them off.
You could
And I
just as
think
easily frame that. Oh, sorry. Finish your thought.
I think they also wrote names down on like a stone somewhere in the center of town, and that person was to be voted out and things like that.
Exactly. And there's plenty of instances in history that are just like that. I mean, if you were to frame it in a modern day light, you could be like, people are, if you were an ancient Greek, and this is kind of what Cicero actually did in Rome, you could complain about how ostracization has gone too far. Now, if you're canceled, you can get literally exiled from town just because you offended people's sensibilities. I don't think we really look at history in that light because it's not as near and dear to us. Looking back, it feels like, well, I mean, it had different motivations. It wasn't about victimhood or like being weak. It was about disliking someone and wanting them out.
Well, I want to dig into your. You basically started with, "Here, I'm old and I know better." Like I heard that at the beginning, and usually when I hear, you know, back in my day, and my brain immediately goes, well, before I start arguing against the back in my day thing, I have to think like they're older than me and they have more wisdom than me and they've seen a lot more than me. So what is it that they have seen that I am not seeing? And so there's still something to gain from it, right? Like they know something. I understand that technology has advanced and society has advanced and they're not they were, raised in a different mode, but there's just like y'all are arguing that even ancient civilization did it. There's still, you know, part of that, right? Like, does that logic apply to them as well? If we're going to say that ancient people ostracize just the same as we do now, can we also say that, well, people nowadays that are saying back in my day, are actually saying something correct?
Of course. And, I've been raised to respect my elders, and they've obviously been through times that I haven't, right? So when it comes to data points and advice, I trust them to lend good experience. Where I start to disagree is when it comes to things that go beyond just like anecdotal advice or, life advice based on personal experience. When people from older generations try to make a argument based on their world model, but there's no empirical evidence to justify that their world model is correct, that's where I start to be suspicious. If it was just down to like, I think people could be more resilient, I would have no debate with that. The thing I have a gripe with is when people talk about how modern society was more or less of something compared to previous generations, because that requires me a higher burden of proof. Now you're making a comparative statement. So are you
Is it
capable of? Yeah,
isn't it empirically obvious that it's more scalable than ever? Why would you need research to show you that we can now scale a victimhood mentality infinitely faster than we could without the internet? Like, what
because
more
truly,
evidence do you need?
good question. Actually, this comes back to the proof of like, what are the conditions for falsification, right? Um, so I thought about this. For me, the reason the statement isn't self-evident, even with the advent of social media, is that speed isn't the only factor worth considering when it comes to, is a society more encouraging of victimhood? So yeah, okay, nowadays you can scale a message like a bajillion times faster than you could by pigeon in the 1500s
Right, right. But
without
wait,
using instructions.
do you think that currently the content, which is very controlled by algorithms, whoever builds these algorithms, do you think currently that modern society is fed victims, or is it fed people who promote resilience? What do you think the balance is? And this could go to both of y'all. Sorry, Josh, leaving you hanging.
No, this is good. This is what the question is actually about. Yeah.
Yeah, do you think that there is, just use your brain, try not to appeal to this research thing real quick, and just go off. I'm just really interested because I think this is what this claim does. It just makes you use your feelings, and that's hyper annoying. I understand. But yeah, use your system one thinking and say, is there more prevalence of victim content, or is there more prevalence of resilient content? Whoever wants to go first.
I feel like everybody thinks that the victim mentality is so bad that we've like really like if anybody senses that, they just sort of maybe it's whatever feed I'm on, whatever my algorithm is. I just never see any people saying like, here's, you're a victim in some way. I mean, maybe the radical conspiratory people, they, I guess it's not really victim mentality in the classic way. So conspiratorial people think that they're victims of the elites, and and sometimes like they're some more crazy things. But I guess that's not the colloquial definition of victim mentality. I don't see like any of like victim mentality really, like not much.
Not even like the news doesn't give you that vibe. Like if you watch just any basic news outlet, you're not like, wow, we're making ourselves victims. I don't know.
I think people do it all the time, kind
Okay.
of, yeah, but I just don't know if it's like, I don't know. It doesn't seem like it's something it seems like we are kind of aware of it, and like all you have to do is call somebody a victim and they're like, uh, like it's a word that has so much negative connotation with it. Like if you can just identify that somebody's playing a victim, then they're just, you know, they're not going to do that
Right.
generally.
We've really built that word into something else for sure. All right. What do you think, Elevator? Did you have any thoughts on that, or are you good?
I have many, but I don't want to keep people on for too long. But
I'm
shit,
good.
I mean, naturally, news that I agree that like social media has made it easier to access victim content. That's element one. Element two is I also agree that in general, news about being hurt tends to float to the top of algorithms when you turn on the TV. Bad news is more prevalent because people are more loss averse, I guess, than they are receptive to good news. I'm no psychologist. Again, usual disclaimers. That seems intuitively true. But where I sense there's a kind of chasm that I'm having a hard trouble crossing is when the claim that news about being hurt floats to the top turns into people are indulging in self-pitying behavior more. And that tends to be the flavor of argument that I see people make when they say the sentence, hey, victimhood content is more prevalent now. Well, prevalent how? Do you mean like people are more likely to be emotionally impacted by this? To make an argument about emotional blunting, maybe actually people are more resilient to bad news than ever because you see it all over the place. Or you could make the claim that, like, well, people are more aware of all the problems in the world, and so it's more statistically likely for them to get depressed about one or multiple bad events. Okay, equally true. But again, we can look back throughout history and see other instances which kind of call into question this modern victim mentality theory. I mean, I don't know if
Let's
I.
let's think of two examples and feel free to say yes or no or elaborate. So,
Sure.
are these individuals victims? You have one person who is severely injured, they have medical bills, and they can't afford them, so they start a GoFundMe. That's person one. You have person two. This person obviously has nothing going on with them. They're just like, I need this material because it'll make me internally feel better inside. They start a GoFundMe. Are they both victims? Who is a victim? Who isn't a victim? They're both, injured in some way and asking for social cooperation.
I suppose it depends on the definitions, but me personally, I would say person one instinctively is a victim because they're hurt in a way that I find meaningful. Person two is not. Well, maybe they are. Maybe they're actually devastated by the fact they don't have a Gucci bag, and I would call them a victim if I had more information about their circumstances. But based on the limited story, I'd be like, well, person one is clearly a victim of physical and emotional distress. Person two, it's more about the absence of optimal happiness than it is about being in distress.
What do you think, Josh?
Yeah, I mean, I remember my position is still supposed to be that society does victimize people, but I mean, yeah, I guess I have a. Maybe I thought I could play devil's advocate more because, but I just sort of say authentically what I think, but um, I mean, again, I just think that so you have these two cases. One person on the GoFundMe is really just using victim mentality. They're posting a reason which is not valid at all, and the other person sort of actually has a valid reason. Again, I mean, I just think that society is so in tune to pointing out victims and stuff like that that it's like if that person was to make that GoFundMe, they would get so many people saying this is victim mentality. Like,
Right. And that's why I think that's why I thought of that is because like where's what's okay, how did you arrive that one is valid and one is invalid?
it's computed case to case basis. People will judge all the circumstances and judge it to other situations, their life, how people talk about it a lot. Like they'll sort of debate a little bit. They'll be like, oh, this person is doing this, and the other person will respond like, oh no, he had a valid reason. Like, you know, it's not their fault that this, that kind of.
It sounds like to me, it sounds like both of y'all, once you understand that there's actual life stakes, then it's valid. But when there's no stake to life, it's invalid, right? Like one person is legitimately harmed, and that's the narrative is that they need this surgery or whatever. And the other one is, well, it's whatever. Like, I don't need this material. Seems like there's a
Yeah.
difference in threat
Uh,
to life.
I mean, that was the definition that we agreed upon, was the colloquial definition was unjustified victimhood. And so I would say, like, by definition, it's self-evident that life-threatening condition is justified. And then as whatever the other one was is just not justified. I thought that was the definition that we,
Right. Okay, let's push the second person, or I will kill myself.
I mean, that depends. Will they
It's
actually kill themselves?
right? Okay, maybe that was too far. I'm trying to push this thought. I think that's the issue with philosophical discussions is you have to say these strange, unethical things so that
No,
you
I'm into
can
it.
find these limits of where we're at. But I understand. Yeah, everything depends. I think that's the infinite answer to everything is everything depends. But thanks for indulging this extended debate. I think I wanted to keep it going because some of it was like we were stretching things, and I wanted to kind of also touch on the zeitgeist and the colloquial stuff.
I would say that our political system is what regulates these morals.
But I mean, if everyone's out there with their morals, and if we share them, well, somebody's gonna break it eventually.
Change. But we do judge cultures as wrong, and that only makes sense if there's a standard above culture.
If we look at everything happening in the universe, it's all either a result of something random or causal, and therefore it doesn't matter how you kind of look at it and slice it. It is just the same type of things. So to
I'm
say,
going to say truth has to be objective in order for it to apply to everybody, right?
If you're a Kantian style deontologist, then it can be a bit contradictory to claim that something is a myth and also helpful.
We actually can make choices that are independent of our determined environment.